Apparently, not letting a complete stranger in yoga pants check your pool water is now a 911 worthy emergency. That's what Lisa screamed while trespassing in my backyard, just before the cops slapped cuffs on her for destroying my pump system, all because I refused to follow her chlorine purity guidelines. So, how did we get here? Oh, let's dive in. Because this isn't just about water chemistry. It's about a nosy, power-tripping Lisa who thought she ran the neighborhood until the law finally ran her out. I never thought I'd have to defend my pool like it was a government secret, but here we are. I bought the house to get away from chaos, not to invite it over in Lululemon leggings and a clipboard. After 10 years of apartment living where my upstairs neighbor hosted drum circles at 2 a.m. and my downstairs neighbor ran a nail salon out of her kitchen, I finally leveled up to suburban bliss, a decent mortgage, a big backyard, and the crown jewel of my kingdom, a custom in-ground pool, heated salt water, remote-controlled LED lights. I even had a waterfall. I didn't want to just swim, I wanted to flex while doing it. Everything was perfect, until Lisa showed up. Lisa lived 2 doors down in a stucco palace with artificial turf and the kind of mailbox that screamed. I peaked in high school. You know the type, perfectly straight hair, surgically arched eyebrows, and the kind of intense, overly cheery smile that says, "I baked cookies, but also called the city on you." She introduced herself the week I moved in by sliding a paper under my door, labeled Welcome Packet, HOA Guidelines. The thing is, I wasn't in the HOA. That's not me being cute with technicalities. I made sure when I bought the place, my house, along with 3 others, was just outside the border. I didn't pay dues. I didn't get the newsletter. I didn't owe them anything. It was beautiful. Lisa, however, refused to accept this. She treated me like a rebellious state that needed to be brought into the union by force. At first, it was harmless. Passive-aggressive comments about my trash bins being visible from the street or reminding me to edge my lawn. I'd smile, say no, and go back to watching my dog dig strategic craters in the backyard. But then I started building the pool, and that's when everything changed. The first time Lisa approached me about it, I was outside talking to the contractors about pool tile. She walked right up like she owned the lot, squinting at the design plans and asking if we'd filed the proper permits with the HOA. I explained, again, that I wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. She frowned like I'd just admitted to raising wolves in my living room. "It's not about jurisdiction. It's about community standards," she said. I told her she could take her standards and write them down in her diary because they didn't apply here. A week later, she came back with printed pages from some generic HOA template website, highlighted in yellow with a sticky note that said, "For your awareness, we'll be watching the chlorine levels." I laughed, thought it was a joke. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. After the pool was finished, I threw a small celebration, nothing wild, just some grilled burgers, backyard music, and a floating cooler. About halfway through the evening, Lisa showed up, not invited, not even dressed for swimming. She stood at the gate holding a clipboard and a cup of what I hoped was lemonade. She announced she was there to conduct a visual inspection. I told her the only thing she was inspecting was the inside of her own eyelids because she was about to get a door closed in. Her face. She didn't take it well. The next day, I found a typed letter taped to my door, "Urgent water safety notice," it read, followed by 2 pages of nonsense about chlorine to water ratio and residual ppm thresholds. It would have been impressive if it hadn't been obviously copied from a Wikipedia article. I considered ignoring it. Instead, I bought a massive privacy fence and scheduled a security camera installation for that weekend. Naturally, that only made things worse. I caught her on camera twice, leaning over the fence with a ladle, trying to scoop water into a Tupperware container. She wore gloves, real crime scene energy. When I confronted her, she pretended she was just rescuing a leaf. I asked if the leaf had a chemical analysis scheduled at 3:00 p.m. She didn't answer, just stormed off in a huff. You'd think that would be the climax. It wasn't even close. Things really started escalating when she dropped off a handmade flyer titled, "Pool Panic. Are your neighbors endangering your family?" featuring a stock image of a child in floaties looking concerned. She went door to door handing them out. Most people ignored her. Some even texted me photos of the flyer with laughing emojis. But Lisa wasn't deterred. Oh no. She doubled down. Suddenly, she had backup. Enter two of her friends from the actual HOA board, Sandra and Margaret, or as I called them, the Chlorine Cabal. They showed up in my driveway one Saturday, dressed like they were auditioning for Real Housewives of Regulatory Oversight, holding clipboards and demanding a formal compliance walkthrough. I asked which part of "I'm not in your HOA" was confusing. Margaret replied, "Sometimes enforcement transcends paperwork," I said. "That's a really fancy way to say you have no legal authority and too much free time." I shut the door on them mid-sentence. That's when things went from annoying to dangerous. A few days later, I came home from work early. Something felt off. I heard splashing not from the waterfall, but distinct, angry splashing. I rounded the corner to find Lisa in my pool, fully dressed, soaked head to toe, yelling something about a hazardous pH spike. She was holding a giant skimmer and had completely torn off the pool pump cover. I froze for a second, trying to understand if this was a prank or a breakdown. When she saw me, she pointed dramatically, like she was in a courtroom drama, and screamed, "This is for the safety of our children." I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't touch her. I just turned around, pulled out my phone, and calmly dialed 911. As I watched Lisa flailing in my pool and tried to explain to the dispatcher that no, I wasn't making this up, and yes, she had actually broken into my yard to conduct a rogue water inspection. A strange feeling washed over me, part disbelief, part amusement, and part righteous fury. This wasn't just pool drama anymore, this was war, and I had the footage, the receipts, and the cops on my side. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't know at the time, was that Lisa wasn't acting alone. There was someone behind all of this, someone with a hidden agenda deeper than HOA power trips and water tests, and they were about to make their move. The moment the police arrived, Lisa immediately went into performance mode, standing drenched in the middle of my backyard, mascara streaked like war paint down her face. She pointed at me and shrieked. He tried to drown me with a hose. The officer blinked, then looked at me, then at the hose, lying innocently 10 feet away from both of us, still coiled and dry. I just lifted my hands and said, "Yeah, that didn't happen." The other officer went straight to my security camera mounted on the back porch and asked if it worked. I nodded. He smiled and asked me to pull the footage. As I scrolled through the recent recordings on my phone, Lisa started getting twitchy. She changed tactics, claimed she was invited into the yard by a contractor, that she had every reason to believe there was a chemical emergency. When the footage played, showing her climbing the fence with a bucket, stomping across the patio like a discount Godzilla, and then yanking the pool pump cover off with enough force to crack it, the mood shifted fast. Her voice cracked. Her lip trembled. She turned to the officer, tried the crying card. "I just wanted to make sure no one got sick. It's a public safety issue." The officer nodded slowly, then told her to put her hands behind her back. And that's how Lisa was arrested, in a soaking wet sundress for trespassing and property damage. I stood there, arms crossed, watching the whole thing unfold like it was the season finale of a show I didn't even realize I was starring in. As they led her out the gate, she turned back and shouted, "This isn't over. I'll have the HOA deal with you." I shouted back, "Tell them to bring their pool skimmers." She didn't laugh. I did. You'd think that would be the end. But Lisa is nothing if not persistent. While she was out on bail, she began posting on Nextdoor and the community Facebook group, painting herself as the victim of a chemical assault and calling me a rogue homeowner conducting unsafe water practices. I wasn't even mad. I was fascinated. The woman had the gall of a Bond villain and the logic of a damp sponge. Then came the letters. This time not printed on her home printer, but real ones on letterhead from the HOA. I opened the first one with the same dread I usually reserve for jury duty. It was a formal notice of violation, citing me for non-compliance with chemical safety protocols, failure to report water treatments, and my personal favorite, aggressive pool coloration. I laughed so hard, I nearly dropped the letter in the pool, but it wasn't funny for long, because this wasn't just Lisa anymore. Turns out, she had convinced the actual HOA board, mostly her yoga buddies and bridge club crew, to extend their influence into what they were calling unincorporated adjacent residential zones. which was code for houses we don't control but desperately want to. They drew up some ridiculous proposal to annex the 4 homes outside their HOA boundaries, mine included, and began enforcing rules they had no authority to impose. It was like a local government coup, except with more sun hats and clipboard checklists. The next week, I came home to find 2 women I'd never met standing in my driveway. Both wore pastel-colored polos and held clipboards like they were about to audit my soul. One introduced herself as Sandra, Chair of Community Environmental Oversight. The other, Margaret, had a name tag that just said Vice President. Safety. They didn't smile. Sandra got right to the point. We're here to perform a compliance walkthrough regarding your aquatic feature. I blinked. You mean my pool? She nodded gravely, as if I'd just said I was harboring nuclear waste back there. Margaret added, there have been concerns about your chlorine ratios and noise levels. You'll need to submit a water maintenance log and grant us temporary inspection access. I stared at them, deadpan. You're not serious, Sandra replied. Very serious. This is a neighborhood health matter. I told them I'd be right back, walked inside, grabbed a notepad, came back out, and scribbled a single sentence on a sheet of paper. I do not consent to your nonsense. Then I handed it to them and said, here's my submission. Margaret frowned like I'd insulted her ancestry. Sandra muttered something about legal consequences. I asked her which law gave a private social club jurisdiction over non-member property. She didn't answer. They left in a huff. Later that night, I posted about the encounter on Reddit. It blew up thousands of upvotes, people sharing similar HOA horror stories, offering advice, legal tips, even memes. My favorite was a photoshopped image of Lisa in a lifeguard chair, scanning a suburban neighborhood with binoculars, captioned Chlorine Cop, keeping communities safe since Tuesday. It was the therapy I didn't know I needed. Of course, the next escalation wasn't funny, not even a little. One morning, I walked out to find my pool pump not running. I opened the housing unit and found it tampered with. Someone had poured something into the filter and cracked the main inlet valve. It smelled like vinegar and bleach. Probably Lisa's special DIY formula. I had security footage again, but this time it was blurry, a figure in a hoodie. Late at night, I couldn't prove it was her, but the coincidence was laughable. I called the police, filed a second report, and showed them everything. They took it seriously this time, apparently. They'd been keeping tabs on her since the trespassing arrest. They promised to increase patrols, not exactly a SWAT response, but I appreciated the gesture. I was angry, sure, but I wasn't going to be baited into a shouting match or an open feud. Lisa wanted attention. She thrived on drama. So instead of giving her that, I lawyered up. I hired a property attorney and had him draft a cease and desist order against both Lisa and the HOA, citing harassment, attempted unlawful governance, and property damage. We sent copies to the HOA board, the city council, and, just for fun, the local news. That got their attention. But just when I thought things couldn't get any more bizarre, my lawyer called and said he'd uncovered something strange while reviewing the HOA's charter and historical filings, something that changed everything. See, the HOA had a clause buried deep in their documents, something they clearly hadn't read or didn't think anyone else ever would. And if it was enforced correctly, it wouldn't just protect me. It could potentially nullify their entire attempt to expand, strip them of enforcement privileges, and dismantle their little kingdom entirely. I sat there in silence, staring at the email he forwarded with the highlighted section, and I realized this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was about to be the endgame. The email from my lawyer sat in my inbox like a glowing treasure chest, one click away from unraveling the entire tangled web Lisa and her clipboard crew had spun. It contained a scanned excerpt from the HOA's original charter, probably written sometime in the early 2000s, judging by the outdated formatting and the Comic Sans headings. But deep in that pile of bureaucratic fluff, buried under paragraphs about lawn gnome height and approved mailbox finishes, was a single clause. It stated, in very plain legal language, that the HOA's jurisdiction could not legally extend beyond the boundaries recorded in the original development agreement without unanimous consent from all affected homeowners. And that consent, it had to be in writing, with signatures, and notarized. The very thing Lisa and her board had claimed to bypass with a flimsy vote and a homemade flyer. It meant their entire attempt to annex my property, and the 3 others outside their domain, was illegal. Worse for them, it meant every citation they issued, every demand letter they sent, every little compliance visit they performed had been done without a shred of real authority. Not only that, but they'd left a paper trail of their overreach, complete with fake fines, harassment, and, in my case, destruction of property. My lawyer smiled when he called. He sounded like a man who'd just been handed the last piece of a puzzle he didn't think existed. We had them. I could have gone nuclear right then, could have sued immediately, sent cease and desist letters to every board member, dragged the entire HOA into court. But honestly, that would have been too clean, too quick. I wanted them to feel it first. I wanted Lisa and her little army of pastel enforcers to stew in their own smugness, just long enough for it to taste bitter when it all collapsed. So I waited. I let them keep circling my house like vultures with scented candles, let them drop off their ridiculous water audit request forms and noise complaint warnings. Even though my pool hadn't hosted a single party in weeks, I let them believe they were winning. Then I got the court date. See, Lisa hadn't taken her arrest lying down. She filed a small claims suit against me, accusing me of willful chemical negligence, verbal intimidation, and the ever-hilarious attempted aquatic assault. Her complaint read like a fever dream scribbled during a wine hangover. She claimed I had intentionally set chlorine traps and used unnatural light reflection to cause visual disorientation. She even tried to cite a made-up rule about pool coloration standards that she claimed I had violated. My lawyer nearly broke a rib laughing when he read it. We countersued for damages to the pool system, legal fees, emotional distress, and attempted fraud via impersonation of legal authority. The court date was scheduled for early Monday morning. I arrived in a crisp navy button-down and jeans, just formal enough to look serious but casual enough to say, "I'm not worried." Lisa came in wearing what I assumed she thought was a courtroom power outfit, a white blazer with massive shoulder pads and oversized sunglasses. She didn't take off until the bailiff asked her twice. She brought a stack of papers and a poster board visual aid titled Chemical: Conspiracies in Modern Suburbs. I could feel my lawyer twitch with anticipation. The judge, an older gentleman who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, called us up. Lisa launched into her monologue like she'd rehearsed it in front of her bathroom mirror for weeks. She spoke about community safety, homeowner responsibilities, invisible threats, and, yes, chlorine terrorism. She even cited a pool chemical safety pamphlet from a local YMCA, as if it were a legal statute. When she was done, the judge turned to me with a look that said, "Please make this quick." I handed over the footage of her trespassing, the damage to my pump, the fake citations, the flyers, the recordings of her screaming about enforcement transcendence, and the printed copy of the HOA charter clause she conveniently ignored. My lawyer explained, in perfect legalese, that not only had Lisa committed property damage and trespass, but the HOA had also operated outside of its legal bounds for months, targeting non-members with unlawful citations and threats of enforcement. The judge didn't take long. Lisa's case was dismissed immediately. My countersuit approved. She was ordered to pay over $33,000 in damages and legal costs. She stood there, stunned, mouth slightly open, like someone had just unplugged her brain mid-thought. I could see the realization sinking in. The empire of pool-related tyranny she'd built was crumbling, but it didn't stop there. The news of the court ruling spread fast, helped along by me posting a quick, tasteful summary on the local community forum. It was nothing dramatic, just a polite PSA that read, in case anyone else outside the HOA received letters, citations, or late-night chlorine checks. The court has ruled those actions unauthorized and unlawful. Happy swimming. It went semi-viral within our zip code. People chimed in with their own stories. Lisa's threats about unapproved flower pots, her clipboard inspections, her attempts to check inside people's sheds for safety purposes. Turned out I wasn't the first to suffer her brand of suburban authoritarianism, just the first to fight back. Within a week, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. They didn't invite me, but that didn't stop the minutes from leaking out. One of the members had had enough and forwarded the entire agenda to a neighbor, who forwarded it to me. The topic: damage control, and legal exposure. They were panicking. Multiple homeowners had started questioning the validity of their citations, demanding refunds for fines, and even threatening their own lawsuits. The board started unraveling. Sandra resigned. Margaret tried to push for a temporary suspension of external enforcement. Lisa insisted they stand their ground, but no one listened anymore. She was radioactive. Then came the final twist. The city stepped in. After reviewing the evidence I had sent and the public backlash, they began auditing the HOA's activities. Apparently, the board had submitted false compliance documents and overstepped multiple boundaries. Not only was their attempted annexation invalid, but they were also in violation of several municipal codes. The city fined them hard thousands of dollars, and those fines weren't coming out of HOA funds anymore. They were hitting the personal wallets of the board members who signed off on the expansions. Lisa was on that list. I watched from my patio one afternoon as she stood outside her house, yelling on the phone, pacing like a caged animal. Her empire was gone, her influence drained. The very neighbors she once bullied were now avoiding her entirely. One guy even changed his walking route to not pass her house. I heard her dog started barking every time she picked up a clipboard. Poetic, I thought. It was over. I really did. But then, on a breezy Friday morning, I found a new letter taped to my door. No HOA logo this time, just a single sheet of paper with shaky handwriting. It read, "This isn't the end. You'll regret this. We all will." And suddenly, I realized Lisa wasn't finished, not yet. The note taped to my door wasn't exactly a threat, but it wasn't a love letter either. It read like a warning, scribbled and rushed, uneven handwriting as if the person who wrote it couldn't decide between vengeance and panic. "This isn't the end. You'll regret this. We all will." I stood there for a moment, reading it again and again, wondering who the "we" referred to. Lisa and the HOA, her clipboard coven, or was she finally cracking under the weight of her own nonsense and trying to bring the whole neighborhood down with her? Either way, the one thing I knew for sure was that Lisa still hadn't learned her lesson, and that made her dangerous in the most pathetic, suburban way possible. I did what any rational person would do. I filed another police report, just to have the note on record. Then I installed another camera, this one facing the front door directly. Between that and the already installed backyard system, my home was becoming less of a residence and more of a mid-budget surveillance hub. A part of me was tired of the letters, the trespassing, the performative HOA nonsense. But a larger part of me, the petty part, the side of me that once spent an entire weekend out stubborning a neighbor over a shared driveway, was energized. Lisa wanted to keep playing. Fine, let's play. I didn't retaliate with anything illegal, no revenge traps or confrontations. I chose something far more effective: exposure. I printed out a simple flyer, white background, black text, no pictures, no drama, just facts. Notice, the HOA board has been operating outside their legal jurisdiction. The recent court case, involving attempts to enforce regulations on non-HOA properties, resulted in financial penalties, legal rulings against board members, and formal municipal reprimands. If you believe you were targeted, fined, or harassed, you may be entitled to damages or refunds. Contact the city compliance office for details. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. The neighborhood already knew where it came from. I just quietly folded 24 of them and slipped them into mailboxes at dawn, like some kind of suburban vigilante. Within 3 days, the neighborhood group chats exploded. People who had previously stayed quiet were now coming out with their own horror stories. A woman down the street revealed Lisa had told her she needed to paint her back fence a specific shade of beige or risk a fine. A retired couple admitted Lisa once tried to cancel their backyard barbecue by claiming it was an unpermitted gathering with noise violations, even though it was just 6 people and a Bluetooth speaker. One man, a soft-spoken guy with 3 kids, said Lisa threatened to report them to CPS because his sprinkler was flooding communal property, his sprinkler watering his own lawn. And with every new story, Lisa's image imploded further. The HOA board, now down to just Lisa and one reluctant elderly man named Greg, who looked permanently confused at meetings, began to shrink away from the spotlight. Lisa, however, refused to go quietly. She doubled down on her new narrative. that she was being targeted by a coordinated smear campaign, that I was organizing a neighborhood rebellion and jeopardizing the safety and order of the community. She started posting daily Facebook rants, each one longer than the last, accusing me of running a smear ring, claiming the chlorine in my pool was affecting everyone's minds, even suggesting I was paying people to sabotage her credibility. Then came the pool party, not hers. Mine. A celebration. Really. I decided to mark the 1-month anniversary of Lisa's court loss with an event so aggressively wholesome, it couldn't possibly be interpreted as anything but a community gathering. I called it the Free Swim and Freedom Barbecue. I set up the grill, inflated a dozen pool floats, invited the entire neighborhood, HOA members and non-members alike, and made sure to mention, casually of course, that the water had been recently tested and found to be Lisa-free. The turnout was unbelievable. Families I'd never spoken to showed up with side dishes. One couple brought cupcakes shaped like chlorine tablets. Kids cannonballed off the edge while their parents shared HOA horror stories over lemonade. Even Greg, the confused, last standing board member, showed up and sat quietly under an umbrella, muttering something about retirement. Lisa, naturally, was not invited. She tried to ruin it, peered through her blinds all afternoon, walked past my house 3 times with her dog, glaring at everyone but saying nothing. At one point, she even stood across the street, arms crossed, phone in hand, probably trying to come up with something to report. But there was nothing to report, no loud music, no code violations, just laughter, hot dogs, and the undeniable smell of her influence evaporating like steam off pool water. That should have been the end. But just when I thought Lisa had finally slunk back into whatever shadow realm she crawled out of, I got an email from my lawyer. The city audit had concluded, and it was bad for them. The HOA's financials were a mess. Improper use of funds, undocumented fees, violations of their own charter, and even forged homeowner signatures on so-called compliance agreements. The audit didn't just slap them with more fines, it invalidated their charter entirely. The HOA, as a legal entity, was dissolved. The news broke fast. The few remaining board members resigned in a blur of emails and deleted Facebook posts. The HOA website went dark. Lisa, somehow, refused to acknowledge the reality. She sent out one last neighborhood-wide email from a personal Gmail account, titled, "A Message from Your True Community Leader." It was 4 pages of unhinged rambling about structure, order, morality, and how vigilante homeowners are the cancer of suburban America. She ended it by claiming she would be forming a new private standards committee and accepting applications from those who truly care about our way of life. No one responded. And just like that, it was over. Lisa no longer had power, no authority, no board, no charter, no excuse to barge into anyone's yard with a measuring tape. The security cameras still rolled, out of habit now more than necessity. My pool pump worked perfectly, the fence stood tall, and the only person who ever tested the water was me, mostly to make sure it was safe to float in while sipping a cold drink. But every story needs a proper ending, something poetic. So I decided to launch a little online shop, purely for humor. Of course, I called it Neighborhood Essentials. The first sold joke items like tiny jars labeled authentic pool water, certified Lisa-free, HOA repel candles, and my personal favorite, a t-shirt that read, "My pool was so clean, it got someone arrested." It wasn't about the money, it was about turning frustration into something fun, something final, a declaration of survival, and, yes, victory, occasionally. I still see Lisa walking her dog. Her posture is a little stiffer now. Her clipboard is gone. She avoids eye contact with everyone. The woman who once believed she was the guardian of community purity now barely speaks above a whisper. Maybe it's shame, maybe it's fear, or maybe she's just finally realized that the neighborhood was never hers to command. It belonged to all of us, and all it took to remind her of that was a little chlorine, a security camera, and a very patient man who refused to be bullied by a laminated flyer. So the next time someone tells you to follow a rule that doesn't apply or demands access to your pool, like they're some suburban EPA agent, remember this story, smile, and say, politely but firmly, "Get off my property."